Hi, everybody. This is Tracy here to review The Real Housewives of Atlanta, Season 9, Episode 2. And this episode was called Housewives House of Wars. For the most part, in this episode, the ladies spent a lot of time, throwing shade and throwing jabs at each other. And most of the time, it wasn't even funny or necessary. And if I had to give an award for the best scene of the night, it would definitely go to Cynthia and Noelle. That mother-daughter talk that they had was award worthy. And I'm glad that they have such a close relationship where Noelle can share exactly what she's feeling with her mom. But we'll get to that later on in the recap. So let's get started. The show opens up the same way it ended on the previous episode. We have Portia and Phaedra arriving to Kenya's housewarming party, and I swear it seems like this housewarming party has lasted forever. But we're back there. They're kind of like replaying that part where they walk up, and we get the expressions from everybody else on their arrival, and then when Kenya walks out and she sees Portia there. She asks Portia, can she speak to her in private? And she lets Portia know that she wasn't invited to the party. And the more I think about it, Phaedra was kind of wrong for bringing Portia to the party with her. That was kind of tacky, but I'm glad that Portia was the bigger woman, and she told Kenya that she understood. She wasn't going to argue or fight with her or let Kenya bring her down. And so her and Phaedra left the party. And so as they were downstairs talking, they had made it down that steep driveway again. So they were down there talking, and Sheree decided to leave. And I don't think Sheree said goodbye to anybody, but she went downstairs and, she was talking with them. And then back up at the party, we have Kenya, and she's explaining, why she didn't want Portia there, and that, she told her she left, and, she was glad that Portia didn't show out. And I think one funny thing that was said was when Phaedra saw Portia and Kenya, going in the room to talk, she was like, Lord, let's not let the Incredible Hulk, show up tonight. So, like I said, Portia did good. So then Kandi, who seemed like she had just gotten to the party, decided that she was going to leave. So I don't even know why she even bothered to come out. But I guess just to make an appearance and make Kenya feel good that she was there. So downstairs we have Portia, Phaedra, and Sheree, and they're talking, and then all of a sudden Matt walks up. And so it's like, okay, well, I thought him and Kenya broke up, because he was, domestic violence or something was going on, but he says hi and he strolls up in the house, and I think he had on all white, so they were like color coordinated, And can we talk about the outfits? Because that outfit that Kenya had on, she was out of line for that. I mean, it was a pretty jumpsuit, don't get me wrong, but Kenya know that all them bustices that she got up in there was too much for that little tiny top. The outfit obviously was not proportionately fit for the size of her breast, and it just made it look very cheap and tacky. But like I said, Matt arrived, and he walked on up, walked into the house like he lived there, and Kenya sees him, and the other ladies, they were kind of surprised that Matt was there, but Kenya, she didn't seem too surprised, and so they go into the bedroom and they talk, and this scene was just like really fake to me because Kenya just she took Matt back so easily. All he had to do was apologize and promise to do better, and she was just like melted sugar in his hands. And it's kind of funny the way that she dogs Portia out all the time about being angry and wanting to fight and everything. When this man, the way she acted, he almost put his hands on her when they were in Mexico. So for her to just forgive and forget and give him another chance, I didn't think was a good look at all. And it also doesn't make Kenya look like she's the strong woman that she pretends to be, because she obviously doesn't have a storyline on the show, because it seems like we're going to hear about, this rivalry between her and Sheree. They keep going on and on about these houses, but I think a better storyline would have been her and Matt, her saying, I don't want you back, I don't want you back, and playing that out for a few episodes. And then, maybe if she decided to take him back, after, 4 or 5 episodes, but for her to just give in and then pretending like she was crying when she really wasn't crying, and like she was all emotional and stuff. Just really poor acting, Kenya. So now we have the scene with Cynthia and Noelle, and they're in the kitchen talking, and Cynthia wants Noelle to know that her and Peter are parting ways, that they're getting a divorce. And Noelle says she's happy because Cynthia seems happier now that Peter is gone. And so, this whole scene, Miss Noelle, she was just giving it to her mom straight, no chaser, and pretty much asked Cynthia was she suffering from low self-esteem. And I thought I was going to fall off the sofa when she said that. But, kids pick up on things and they observe, our different emotions and our different moods. But I was kind of wondering if Noelle has been talking to someone else about what's been going on in the house with her mom and Peter, because she did bring up the fact that her bedroom, I guess, was like up the hall or maybe next door. And so she could hear them arguing and fighting, and she just couldn't understand why Cynthia would just keep having the same argument with the same person about the same thing when it obviously wasn't getting any better. So I'm thinking Noelle probably was talking to her dad about her mom and Peter, and the dad probably was telling her that Cynthia had low self-esteem. And so either way, it was a good scene, and I like the fact that Cynthia didn't get upset or, mad at Noelle, but she explained to her, about relationships, and you really want it to work, but at some point you have to do what's best for you. And so, and they hugged and embraced at the end. I thought that was real special. So Lord have mercy, we back there with Todd and Kandi and baby Ace. And Kandi, she's branding baby Ace. She's about to make some money after she's taking tips from the Kardashians that everybody got to bring some money into this house. And so she's creating a baby line for Ace. And she was saying that, he already has a huge Instagram following. And I think that's kind of sad because the kids that are coming up today, they're going to be like the first generation that has no privacy. They have no choice about their privacy because the parents are just putting them, on display on social media. And so, when they get to the point where they can make a decision, hell, there's nothing to make a decision about because their whole life has been exposed to the world. And so when I see parents like Kandi, who are putting the baby pictures out there and just everything that's going on in the child's life, I kind of feel for the children. And I remember Erica Dixon from Love and Hip Hop Atlanta. It was the first day of school, and she was periscoping her daughter Imani, and Imani did not want to be in the camera, and she was like begging Erica, like, please mom, turn the camera off. And I was thinking, I think Imani's like in the second grade, and she already knows that she doesn't want to be in the public eye. And so I just think it's unfair that parents just thrust their kids out there. But, like Kandi say, they got to make that money. They got to make those coins. So, baby Ace, I hope your baby line is a success. And so we also had the first look at the Old Lady Gang restaurant. And so they have a lot of work to do. And Kandi pointed out that they were supposed to open in May, but they were behind. And then they were supposed to open in August. And here we are in November, and I think I've heard people say that it still isn't open. And so we have Aunt Nora and Aunt Bertha and Mama Joyce, they come and they do their first walkthrough. And Mama Joyce, she was looking around, looking at all them decorations and decors and listening to Todd talk about what all he was going to do. They were going to have this room for this and this room for that, and they were going to have a stage and all this other stuff. And Mama Joyce was sitting there calculating how much this is costing Kandi, because she knows Todd can't afford to do all this stuff that he's doing. We can't let Kandi off the hook because she was making her little slick remarks about, basically saying that they would be further along and the restaurant was open if she was in charge and running things, because, she knows how to get it done. And so, but, she's trying to be the good wife and give Todd the opportunity, to make this thing come to fruition. But back to Aunt Nora and Aunt Bertha, all they were concerned about was, what is their percentage of this? What is their appearance fee? And how much are they going to get paid for their likeness? Because they have no intentions of being in there cooking. They might come take some pictures and shake some hands, but they want to know what's their pay. And I can't believe that they haven't entered into a contract to discuss all that and determine what they are going to make from this venture, since it's their recipes and their likeness that they're using to build the brand of this restaurant. So, the restaurant they're building it, but they don't even know how much money they're going to get paid. And so Kandi better do right by her aunties, or we know Mama Joy's coming for them. So we also saw Kandi later on in the show, and she's at her office, and it's her, Todd, Mama Joyce, Don Juan. And I think the other guy name is Rodney. Remember, it was the guy and Carmen. You know, they were really close friends. And so Carmen wasn't there. I don't know what's going on with her, but he was there. And like I said, I think his name is Rodney. And so they're sitting there gossiping and carrying on. And Kandi was telling them about how Portia was asked to lead the housewarming party, and she was telling them about, you know, the house and everything. And then Mama Joyce starts talking about Phaedra. And she was saying how, you know, Phaedra should be in the jail cell next to Apollo, and that Phaedra's walking around talking about, you know, she's having trouble getting this divorce through. But Mama Joyce done Googled and found out that in the state of Georgia, if you're married to somebody who's sentenced to more than 2 years in prison for like fraud and some other thing, murder and other things like that, that you can get a instant divorce. And so they done went all online. So, you know, Kandi, you know, she's sitting there laughing and, you know, encouraging and instigating it. But then she's also saying, you know, oh, you know, don't say that. Don't talk about her. You know, that's not nice. But Kandi, you either part of the drama or you part of stopping the drama. You can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and be gossiping and laughing, and then on the other hand telling other people, you know, they shouldn't be that way about your former friend that you're trying to, you claim you want to mend the fence, but you know, you keep doing things to her that once she sees it, she's never going to trust you again. So then the next couple of scenes were kind of odd. We had Phaedra and Kenya. You know, they went to lunch together and didn't really talk about much of anything. And then we had Sheree and Portia, who went to lunch, seems like at the same time, and they wasn't really talking about nothing either. And so I was thinking, like, was this just filler space, you know, to fill some time? Because there really isn't much going on in the show. Like, I don't know what they're doing here, but they really needs to find some good storylines for these women, or, you know, the show isn't going to make it. And then I was thinking, you know, maybe it was all about product placement. You know, maybe these people paid them to come to the restaurants for some publicity so they could be seen on the Real Housewives of Atlanta. And right after those two lunch scenes, then we had another, like, unimportant, meaningless scene with Kenya, Cynthia, and Kandi, where they went to this spa, you know, to get waxed. And Cynthia was in there and she was eating the wax, and she said that it was edible wax. And then she was yelling out to the other girls, you know, that they should try it because it really tasted good. And Kandi was like, I'm not trying that, because they dipped in that same jar with the person before you. So, you know, their coochie hairs might be down in that wax and you sitting there eating it. And, you know, other than that little line, that whole scene served no purpose also. Then we had Lena, who's Kandi's friend, and she was saying that Sheree came into her business and that she was, you know, running down this laundry list of things that were wrong with More Manor and things that Kenya hadn't done, and was, you know, talking negatively about Kenya and her house. And, you know, so now Kenya, of course, is saying, you know, well, she's got to get with Sheree to, you know, get some straightening. Then we had Cynthia and Peter, and, you know, they're meeting up at, I think the restaurant was called Drip. I don't know, couldn't figure out what they were selling in the place, but they met up. And so, you know, Peter was basically telling Cynthia that he had went to the hospital because he thought he was having a heart attack, and that when the people asked him for his in case of emergency contact, it finally hit him, you know, that his marriage was over and that he could no longer use Cynthia as that person. And then as Cynthia was trying to say, well, you know, we're going to always be friends. You know, I don't want us to, like, not be friends once this is all over. It's just that I don't want to drag this out and we really have no future together. So then Peter pulled out his phone and called the attorney and told the attorney, you know, he was ready to move forward, send him whatever papers, and he was going to sign the papers. And that was just like, you know, so typical, you know. So Cynthia was looking a little sad, but I think she knows that she's done the right thing. And then after that conversation with Noelle, even if she wanted to take Peter back, I don't think she could. And I do agree with Cynthia, you know, about dragging things out, because there are a lot of people that break up, but they never get divorced. And then they move on to other relationships, and then something happens and we find out that they're still married. And then here comes the estranged wife or the kids or whatever. And then they come and take everything from the person that you done built a new life with. So yes, it is best to get a divorce and keep it moving. And then I also kind of, on the flip side, I felt bad because, you know, a lot of couples get divorced after they do reality TV. So it should be a warning that if you are married or planning on getting married, you might not want to be on one of these shows. So we all know that Portia's been attending her anger management classes. So to show her progress, she decided to do a play date with the ladies, and they go to Escape Adventures. And I've never been to that before, but I know they have opened up here in the city where I live at. And I was looking forward to going and doing it, but after watching this episode, it really didn't look like it was a lot of fun, or maybe it wasn't fun because of the people that were playing the game. So Portia set the date up, and all the women agreed to attend. And Phaedra arrived first. You know, she was early or on time, I guess. And then Kandi came next. And for some reason, so there were like these two bars, you know, like the tall round tables, and Phaedra was sitting at one table, and then there was a table right next to it, and Kandi sat at that table instead of sitting at the table with Phaedra. And so then Phaedra was on her phone, and Kandi was like giving Phaedra the side eye, like, oh, you just gonna talk on, you know, text on your phone or be on your phone and not have a conversation with me. But I'm thinking if Kandi really wanted to have a conversation with Phaedra, she would have sat at the table with Phaedra, which really would have made it awkward, you know, for Phaedra to ignore her, you know, by being on the phone. So finally, all the other ladies, they arrive, and so Portia decides to divide them up into two groups. And so the groups were Portia, Cynthia, and Kenya. And then in the other group, it was Kandi, Phaedra, and Sheree. So the way it works, the teams are locked in a room, and they have 30 minutes to figure out the clues and get out of the room. So of course, you know, Kenya has some little slick remark to make about, you know, hopefully Portia doesn't have to figure out where the Underground Railroad is or something like that. But it turns out that Cynthia, Kenya, nor Portia really knew what they were doing, because they didn't get out of the room in the 30 minutes. And then the other team was kind of struggling too. And the way it was edited, you really couldn't tell if the other team did make it out of the room. All I know is that the time ran out, and then Kandi opened the door to the room that Portia and the other ladies were in and told them that the time was up. But like I said, that was not a good marketing trick, because the way they chopped that thing up and edited, it did not look like Escape Adventures is a fun outing for anybody. But who knows? Maybe I'll get some friends together and we'll go try it out and have a little more fun than they seem to have had. So after everybody had left, Kenya and Sheree, you know, they linger back, and then Kenya confronts her about, you know, what Lena said, you know, Sheree had said. And then they got into this back and forth argument about, you know, each other's houses, you know, and Sheree was talking about how Kenya's house wasn't ready and she shouldn't have had the housewarming party. And then Kenya, you know, was going at Sheree about it took her 5 years to get her house done, and that the house isn't in her name, and that it should be called Chateau Thelma. And I'm just like, at this point, I think everybody is over this bickering and back and forth. You know, they're both close to finishing their houses. They both have very nice houses. So it's like, let it go and just enjoy your homes if that's what you want to do. And to pray to God you be able to pay for the houses, pay for the upkeep, and that you don't lose the houses. But this, if this is what their storylines is going to be, this back and forth, then I'm not going to make it, because I'm already over it and we're just in episode 2. Oh, and I also wanted to add that whoever's writing Kenya's, you know, her little shady moments, either Kenya's delivery is off or their writing is off. But either way, it's just coming off like very rehearsed, and it's just not really winning any points. She's just coming off looking like she's really petty and stupid and needs to get a life. So before I go, I want to mention that in my recap of Married to Medicine on last week, I mentioned that the two shows had a lot of similarities with their formats, and I'm seeing that trend again this week, where in Married to Medicine we had the friend Janice that comes along, and then she got into it with Heavenly and was repeating, you know, things that Heavenly had said to her, and she was upset about that. And then in Real Housewives of Atlanta, we have Lena, who is Kandi's friend, you know, and then she's getting into it and starting stuff with Sheree, or repeating what Sheree said and causing the argument with Sheree and Kenya. So I don't know if they have the same producers working on the shows, but, you know, they really need to come up with some more original storylines. Well, that's it for me. Leave your comments below and rate and subscribe to the channel. And I'll have Married to Medicine and Issa Rae's Insecure up later on tonight. So peace and blessings. Take care. Bye-bye.